Imagine waking up in a hospital room. You don't know how you got there. You don't know what day it is. You don't know who you are. You were not in a war. You were not in an accident. You were an ordinary American citizen, and your own government put you there. This is not science fiction. This is not a conspiracy theory. This happened. It was funded by taxpayer dollars. It was approved at the highest levels of the Central Intelligence Agency. And for 2 decades, almost no one knew. This is the story of Project MKUltra. The year is 1950. The Cold War is not just a political standoff, it is a psychological arms race. American intelligence officials are terrified, not of bombs, not of missiles, of something far more unsettling. They believe the Soviet Union and Communist China have developed techniques to control the human mind, to break a man's will, to make him confess to things he never did, to turn loyal soldiers into sleeper agents. The Korean War has just begun, and American POWs are coming home saying things, strange things, about communism. Things that sound rehearsed, things that sound programmed. The term being whispered in classified briefing rooms was brainwashing. And the CIA decided, if the enemy has it, we need it first. What followed was one of the most disturbing covert operations ever authorized by the United States government. In April 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles gave the green light to a program that would operate in total secrecy for the next 20 years. It was called MKUltra. The MK prefix stood for the CIA's Technical Services Staff. Ultra was chosen to reflect the operation's classified level, beyond top secret. The man placed in charge was Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist, a CIA officer, and by all accounts, a deeply ideological Cold Warrior who believed the ends absolutely justified the means. Gottlieb was no rogue agent. He had funding, he had a mandate, and he had one central obsession. Could the human mind be chemically or psychologically manipulated? Could you make someone forget who they were? Could you make them do things against their will? Could you, in theory, create the perfect spy or the perfect assassin? These were not hypothetical questions. They were research objectives. And to answer them, MKUltra would eventually fund over 150 research projects across 80 institutions, including universities, hospitals, prisons, and mental health facilities across the United States and Canada. Many of the people subjected to these experiments never consented. Most of them never even knew they were part of a government program. The centerpiece of MKUltra's research was a drug most Americans know by just 2 letters: LSD. Lysergic acid diethylamide had just been synthesized by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann in 1943. The CIA got hold of it almost immediately, and Sidney Gottlieb became convinced it was the master key. In early experiments, the CIA dosed willing volunteers, soldiers, prisoners offered reduced sentences, psychiatric patients. But soon, those guardrails disappeared. They began dosing people without telling them. At CIA safe houses in New York and San Francisco, a program called Operation Midnight Climax was set up. Prostitutes paid by the government would lure men into these apartments. Hidden cameras recorded everything, and the men, completely unaware, were given LSD-laced drinks. They were watched, observed, studied like lab rats in a trap they couldn't see. But the most chilling moment, the one that cracked everything open, involved one of their own. Frank Olson was a U.S. Army biochemist working closely with the CIA. In November 1953, he was given LSD without his knowledge during a work retreat. He spiraled into a severe psychological crisis. 9 days later, Frank Olson fell from a 13th floor window of the Hotel Statler in New York City. The CIA called it a suicide. For 20 years, his family was told he had jumped in a moment of mental distress. The truth was far darker, and it would not surface for decades. MKUltra was not just about LSD. That is where most people stop, but the program went much further. Researchers experimented with hypnosis, attempting to create what they called hypnotic couriers, people who could carry information across borders without consciously knowing they had it. They experimented with electroconvulsive therapy, electric shocks applied not therapeutically, but deliberately and repeatedly to see if they could wipe a person's memory and rebuild them from scratch. They used isolation, sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, and psychological torture. One of the most horrifying sub-programs was run by Dr. Ewan Cameron at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, funded covertly through CIA front organizations. Cameron believed he could de-pattern the human mind, destroy a patient's existing personality, and rebuild it from zero. He called it psychic driving. Patients, many of whom had checked in for mild depression or anxiety, were kept in drug-induced comas for weeks. Some were put to sleep for months. They were subjected to repeated audio loops played through helmets around the clock. Many emerged permanently damaged. Memory loss, regression to childlike states, inability to function, families torn apart, lives destroyed. They had not signed up for this. They were told they were receiving treatment. Meanwhile, back in Washington, the CIA was testing substances for potential use in assassinations and interrogations, chemicals that could induce temporary psychosis, permanent incapacitation, or death that looked natural. The program had no ethical floor. And Sidney Gottlieb himself described MKUltra's goal with chilling clarity. They wanted to find a way to get operationally useful results from the manipulation of the human mind. Operationally useful results. Those are the words used when human beings are treated as instruments rather than people. In 1973, sensing political heat from Watergate and the growing scrutiny of covert government operations, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MKUltra files. Thousands of documents, shredded, burned, gone. Helms thought he had buried it forever. He was wrong. In 1977, a CIA archivist discovered approximately 20,000 documents misfiled in a financial records building overlooked during the purge. A Freedom of Information Act request had turned up what the shredders missed. The Senate launched its own investigation. That summer, Americans sat in front of their televisions and watched government officials confirm what would have sounded like lunacy just years before. The CIA had secretly drugged American citizens without consent, without knowledge, in violation of every principle of medical ethics, civil liberties, and human decency. Frank Olson's family finally learned the truth. Years later, his body was exhumed. A forensic examination suggested he had been struck on the head before going through that window. Many believe Frank Olson was not a suicide. They believe he was silenced. The government settled with his family. No one was ever prosecuted. The victims of Ewan Cameron in Canada received partial settlements. A small number of American victims were quietly compensated. No one went to prison. No one faced criminal charges. Sidney Gottlieb retired to a farm in rural Virginia where he tended goats and practiced Zen meditation until his death in 1999. He never faced justice. So what do we do with MKUltra? Some would say it was a product of its time, a Cold War panic, a fear-driven program that went too far. And that context matters, but context does not excuse what happened. Fear does not justify experimenting on human beings without their consent. Ideology does not license a government to treat its own citizens as laboratory subjects. What MKUltra revealed was not just a rogue program, it revealed what happens when power operates without accountability, when secrecy replaces oversight, and when the mission justifies the methods, no matter how monstrous. The Church Committee hearings of the 1970s that exposed MKUltra led to real reforms. Congressional Intelligence Oversight Committees, executive orders restricting domestic covert operations, new standards for human research ethics. Those reforms were hard-won, and they are not permanent. Every generation has to decide how much secrecy it will tolerate, how much trust it will extend, and what price it is willing to pay in the name of national security. MKUltra is not ancient history. The last known experiments concluded in 1973. There are people alive today who were children when this program was active. There are victims whose stories have never been fully heard. And the documents that were destroyed, the full scope of what was conducted, we will never know. That absence of knowledge is itself part of the story. A government powerful enough to protect you is powerful enough to experiment on you. The men and women who ran MKUltra believed they were protecting America. They destroyed American lives to do it. The question they never asked, the question every free society must keep asking, is this: who watches the watchmen? If this story moved you, if it made you think, hit that like button and subscribe. History this important shouldn't stay buried. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What part of this story shocked you the most? We read every single one.